Welcome to Women of the Metaverse. I am Cheryl Laidlaw.
I am Angela Harkness. We have been and are still on a journey to discover the metaverse, Web 3.0, NFTs, and anything that we are required to know to join this world.
From this podcast, we will help you to unlock how the metaverse is going to impact your brand, your business, and even your personal life.
Join us as we take the mystery out of this new digital universe. Welcome to Women of the Metaverse. In this episode, we are talking about how the blockchain has and is going to change healthcare. Way back, what seems such a long time ago now, we recorded episode 7, What is Blockchain? If you're not listening to it, we urge you, once you've listened to this one, to download it. We think it's really interesting, and personally I learned a lot from researching that episode. But to help you, do you want to just give us a quick overview, Cheryl?
Absolutely. So a blockchain is a digital ledger of transactions. It is a chain of blocks that holds and records the data on transactions as they are completed in canonical order. So for example, if we create an NFT and put it on OpenSea to sell, as soon as we load it onto OpenSea, the first block in the chain is created. When someone buys the NFT, the next block is created, holding the sales data, how much it was purchased for, who sold it, and who purchased it. If it was sold again, the next block is created, and on and on and so on. There is not one blockchain. It is a technology that can be created to hold any data. So if you're purchasing, for example, an NFT, it will tell you what currency you are purchasing it in and also what blockchain. On OpenSea, it may say that you are purchasing this using ETH on the Ethereum blockchain. But blockchains certainly are not just for buying and selling. As the technology grows in all industries, there are companies creating new blockchains. In this episode, we're not talking about NFTs, we're talking specifically about healthcare, how the blockchain is already being used in this area and how it may impact our lives in the future. This technology is considered to be much more efficient and secure than the current technologies being used, but the jury is still out. It is a fairly new technology, but in this episode, we want to talk to you about the possibilities and why it may be used to progress the healthcare industry.
I was really shocked when researching this, how much it is being used
Already,
though, particularly in the States. So I was really surprised at how many companies have already really working with big healthcare centers and hospitals.
Amazing.
So I know. If anyone understands the NHS, you receive at birth your lifelong NHS number. But NHS trusts for each area are not connected. If you move and you go to your doctors to register, you give them your NHS number, and then they have to request your medical records from whatever area you came from. So I experienced this with my mum. When my mum was taken into hospital, we would go to one particular hospital that is the standard everybody would go to. But when she had to be taken in again, I wanted her to go to a different hospital because it was smaller and it was closer to me and my brother. And so when I went to give them the details and say, oh, well, here her number, they were like, oh, yeah, but we're not connected. We can't see her record. And I was like, really?
Yeah.
She could, the
they can take so long to have them sent between hospitals as well.
Yeah. So there's still this disparity. So although the NHS is this one big thing, actually it's really quite disjointed.
Yeah. We still need to come a long way.
Yes, we do. In the US, it's even more complex because of the nature of their healthcare system connected with insurance companies. So not only is there a requirement for medical records to be stored, but they also hold financial details, for example, your insurance company or even credit card details. So according to reports, there were 692 large healthcare data breaches between 2021 and 2022. That's mammoth, isn't it?
That's a lot.
That's scary.
Yeah.
When it comes to the blockchain being used in healthcare, what is talked about most is the individual medical records. And regardless of what country, there will be some kind of system for keeping medical records. And what unites us all is that we all have a requirement for a medical record. And as we get older, they become longer and more complex. The blockchain helps these become much more secure and efficient. You, as the patient and the medical record holder, will have more control and access, but it's also easier to access from wherever you are in your healthcare
Well, I
system.
think this is brilliant actually, because when I went to Greece when I was 16, I went into emergency care, straight into uh, a special unit because I had a kidney problem. And to this day, I still don't know what the issue was. I was in hospital for 10 days. Um, I have no idea if it's on my medical records. And I was just told to get on with it. So I have no idea what was wrong with me. No idea.
And you don't know if it's there, and it could be
Yeah,
relevant later in life, couldn't
absolutely.
it?
Yeah. I have no idea.
Yeah,
Just hope it's gone away.
crazy. So our NHS, mine is Cheryl's. We don't own it, obviously, but the one we belong to covers England and Wales. And as we've mentioned, you're given an NHS number at birth, and then your medical records begin. So this is your date of birth, this is your sex, this is your time of birth. The problem comes with how disjointed the technology is between different healthcare areas. But the blockchain could solve that problem and therefore enable your medical records to be available and updated from wherever you are by whoever should be granted access to them. At the moment, you would have to put in a request to get a medical record and then wait to receive them. So that's, every time you went to a doctor, another block could be you've had this vaccine, or you've given birth, or
Mm,
whatever. And
creates a
it's
block
just a
each time.
chronic, yeah, and it's just a chronological record of what's gone on in your life. Adding on top of that, depending on where you are in the world and how that is billed or accounted for financially. So, as you know, in the UK, we have the NHS. If we went to hospital, there's no cost to us. We don't leave having to pay anything. But a hospital still has to account for us as a patient being in the hospital, how much it costs, what treatments we receive, all the staff and suppliers that needed to be paid as a result of our care. If you're in a different country and the system is different, for example, in the US, you've got that added complexity of who is paying, what does your insurance cover, what the patient pays, what you as a patient might have to fork out. And I've seen some of those bills. They're
Mm,
mammoth, aren't they?
yeah, the nightmare stories
And
from the States.
yeah, I know. What happens if the patient doesn't have insurance? And I don't even know how they start to chase for payment. If you get a bill for £1 million for being in hospital for a few weeks, the blockchain could be set up to make that any financial accounting and planning much more efficient. And you would hope reducing costs or enabling medical centers to just make greater investments in healthcare.
Another area that blockchain is already being used for and will only be increased in the future is supply chain distribution. Just think about how complex it is to run a single hospital, to track everything from patients, outbound appointments, clinics, doctors, nurses, equipment, and drugs. It is its own little world in one building that is highly regulated and very open to mistakes. So, the use of blockchain to track the supply chain could drastically increase efficiency, lower costs, provide a better experience for patients, and decrease the level of mistakes.
When you ever go to a hospital, I know going to the Royal Baths, which is quite near me, you walk down these long corridors and there's always all this equipment left out, like loads of
Just dumped
beds
in the hallways.
just everywhere. And they need to be tracked. Someone needs to know where they are. And I'm assuming they have a system for it already, but just that kind of blockchain of this bed was here, moved by so and so on this day and put here would make it so much easier. Can you imagine the level of equipment in a
I
hospital
could
must
imagine the
be?
efficiency of your hospital, Angela. So actually, Stratford upon Avon and Warwick NHS Trust used blockchain technology to track COVID-19 vaccines because, as you know, all vaccines had to be stored differently and there had to be enough distributed to hospitals, GP surgeries, and vaccine centres.
I know one of the biggest problems, I mean, again, in the NHS, if you're given a prescription when you leave hospital, there's always a pharmacy in the hospital and you get that prescription for free because, oh, you know, if you went to a pharmacy outside of hospital, you pay for a prescription, but in a hospital, you get it for free. But I've seen people sit for 7 hours waiting for a prescription to be delivered from the pharmacy because obviously they're incredibly busy. But whilst they're waiting for that prescription to be delivered, that bed is still sat occupied. So there are people waiting to get beds, but somebody can't leave the hospital because they've not had their prescription.
Yeah,
So something like a blockchain that could potentially make that more efficient would make it really useful because it just like blocks up the process for
absolutely.
that.
And my dad used to wait for to be dropped off for hours and hours.
Yeah.
Again, using a bed, or they used to just dumping him in his clothes and just leave him on the side and sort of think, you know, it's just not right. It needs to be sorted.
No. Yes, it does.
What comes on the back of supply chains is contracts. We have talked a lot about smart contracts that can be written into the blockchain. There is a huge amount of contracts that need to be managed. Again, just in one single hospital. Contracts to the pharmaceutical companies, those that supply medical equipment, agency staff and nurses, cleaners, ambulances, office equipment, and catering. We have no clue how much is involved, but with the blockchain, smart contracts can be added when contracts are being negotiated. Once a contract is agreed, how much payment is made and then renegotiated.
It's massive, isn't it?
Mammoth.
Just huge. Because what I know when my mum came home, she had to have certain equipment and it was really efficient actually. So from her when they said she was coming out of hospital, by the time she got home, everything that was at the house. The bed was at the house, a table, there was a wheelchair. They even put a key safe on at the outside of a door because carers would be coming in. But all of that equipment has to be kept track of because we had it in our house for a year and then some of it needs to be serviced, some of it needs to be exchanged.
Yeah.
And just that level of holding all of that data is mammoth, isn't it?
Yeah, it
Like
really
some
is.
people might have that in their house for life that needs to come and go. So the blockchain is something that can just make that more efficient.
Yeah.
Like your dad had stuff too,
Oh,
didn't
yeah,
he?
absolutely. We had to ring them.
Wheelchairs.
Can
Yeah.
you come pick your stuff up?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we did too. Can you come and pick it all up? Anyway, research obviously in healthcare is huge. I've worked for several pharmaceutical companies, and the level of regulation it takes to get a drug out the door is just mammoth. Some of the simplest tasks would need to be signed off. And the particular area I worked in, everything had to have a fully written process that you couldn't use unless you had passed the test to do it, including actually writing processes. So, as you know, to get a drug from development for it to it being given a certificate to be sold can take decades. What is required to enable that is data and patient data. And again, this is an area where the blockchain can be used because, as we have said before, the blockchain can be very open but also very secure. So, using blockchain technology, you can pull just the data that is required. You can input smart contracts that control what a research developer can and can't have access to. You can create smart contracts for the supply and use of the data and to validate the company. Because I could imagine there's a lot of forfeit that goes on around data. I don't know if there's a problem with it being stolen.
I'm sure, like in all industries, data breach.
Yes. As healthcare develops, there may be a greater emphasis for more to be done in home. For example, if you're fitted with a heart monitor, that data can be automatically put through to a doctor and blockchain technology could track it. You may be prescribed a program which you yourself would need to track and have access to your medical data via the blockchain. And it would mean you can add the required data. I listened to something the other day where they were talking about what goes in a database and what goes onto the blockchain, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
So I think there's still a need for databases, but the whole concept of blockchain can just make that movement of data more
I was
efficient.
going to say, it just sounds like a more efficient way, the blockchain route.
More secure.
More secure and,
and efficient,
they
right?
can have access to what they need and block what they don't need.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
In this episode, we wanted to introduce you, if you haven't already investigated yourself, to blockchain and how it can be a powerful tool and may change the way in which we interact with those elements of our lives that we take for granted every day. There is always a debate when it comes to data because it can make people very nervous about what information is held about us, how it will be used, and if it is safe. Blockchain technology is touted to be secure and efficient. But as we said earlier in this episode, the jury is still out. But we always advise you to do your own research because if nothing else, it is incredibly interesting. And some of the ways in which it is being used is very creative and is breaking the boundaries on how reliant we have become with what can be very old and impractical processes. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Join us next week as we continue our journey into the metaverse. See you then.
Bye for now. Thank you for listening to this episode of Women of the Metaverse.
You can find all information, links, and people we talked about in the show notes on our website.
If you have enjoyed this podcast, please comment and subscribe.
Join us again in the next episode as we continue this exciting metaverse journey.